So, good afternoon, everyone. And let us carry on with the Upakilesa Sutta, the Corruption Sutta, and coming to the kind of grand finale here of this sutta, the going all the way up to awakening at the very end. I believe. Have I included that? Yes. So that's good. So so far we have looked at all the various defilements of the mind, in particular those refined defilements that come up during the very last stages before you enter the really deep samadhi of the jhanas. And before we come to the jhanas, there's a little bit more territory to be covered here. And all of this is interesting. All of this kind of adds to our understanding of the nature of samadhi and the various degrees of samadhi that is achievable on the path. So let us look at these little details before we come to the end here. So then the Buddha says, when I understood that doubt is a corruption of the mind, I gave it up. When I understood that loss of focus, dullness and drowsiness, terror, excitement, discomfort, excessive energy, overly lax energy, longing, perception of diversity, and excessive staring of forms are corruptions of the mind, I gave them up. So these are then, so you give it up, you contemplate them, you understand why they arise and look into the causality. And then you make sure that you don't fall for those same causes in the future, you avoid them. And in that way you give it up. We've seen basically the process as we have been going through these upakilesas. And then the Buddha carries on. He says, while meditating, diligent, keen, and resolute, I perceived light, but did not see forms. Or I saw forms, but did not see light. And this went on for a whole night, a whole day, even a whole night and day. I thought, what is the cause? What is the reason for this? It occurred to me, when I don't focus on the foundation of the forms, but focus on the foundation of the light, then I perceive light and do not see forms. But when I don't focus on the foundation of the light, but focus on the foundation of the forms, then I see forms and do not perceive light. And this goes on for a whole night, a whole day, or even a whole night and day. So what is this all about? So here he is seeing one of the two aspects, either the forms or the light, but not both. And so the point here of this is to say that actually we should have both in our perception at the same time. If you only have one, you have a limited access to samadhi. Both of these are really required for samadhi. And why is that? And the reason is because light, that is like the attractiveness of the object. The light draws you in. The light is what is comes with the bliss, comes with the attractiveness of this whole thing. That is what draws you in. Whereas the form, the shape, is what makes focus easier. If you have a shape like a round thing, it's quite easy to focus on. If everything is just white in your perception, just light, then it's too diffuse to really focus on properly. So this allows the focus, and also it draws you in because of the bliss. And so what the Buddha is saying here really is that these things that we call nimittas in the kind of common vocabulary of meditation in the present day, that's how the vocabulary we use now. In those days it wasn't used that way, but that is actually, it seems to be almost like a requirement for samadhi. This is how you enter samadhi, basically, through these visions of lights in your meditation practice. So they are obviously very important. Otherwise the Buddha wouldn't go to such length to talk about these things. Sometimes you find this discussion in Buddhist circles, what is a nimitta? What is a proper kind of object to use in your meditation? Can you use something else? Can you use, some people talk about the sound of silence. Is that kind of a proper nimitta? And the Buddha certainly nothing about in the suttas about that. So maybe doubtful. Can it just be a feeling? Is it enough just to have the feeling without saying anything? Just piti sukha. And again, maybe that is more likely, because that is how the path is described in the suttas, through piti, through sukha. But again, it seems here that it is not certainly not the ideal or preferred way. The preferred way seems to be this. The feelings have to be there, combined with these kind of visual states. There may be some people who are very unvisual, who don't visualize things very much. Maybe for them the feelings are sufficient. But I think for the majority of people, these visual nimittas, the signs, the marks of samadhi are required. And so this goes on for a whole day and night. So in other words, these are kinds of samadhi nonetheless that go on for a long time, but not really sufficient. So what is the cause and the reason? And it occurred to the Buddha, or the Buddha-to-be rather. This was before he was a Buddha. He was still finding his way. When I don't focus on the foundation of the forms, the foundation, here the word nimitta occurs, just to make things confusing, and it means foundation or cause, or it's the basis for what is going on. In the one of the suttas in the Majjhima, the Chula Vedalla Sutta or Mahavedalla Sutta, Majjhima 43 or 44, you have that Satipatthana is the nimitta of samadhi. In other words, it is the object that helps you to achieve samadhi. It is the cause of samadhi, the foundation of samadhi. Satipatthana, including the breath. In other words, including the things that we are looking at right now, are part of this cause for samadhi. So the foundation for that is whatever is the cause that gives rise to the seeing of forms. So what is that cause? Well, one of them is a certain degree of peace, that you have achieved through meditation. And another one is probably that you intend to see forms. You want to see forms. Your mind inclines towards seeing these things, and that's why you see them. So that is the foundation for forms. So, and if you don't focus on the foundation of forms, then but you focus on the foundation of light, then you see light. So this is kind of depending on what your mind is inclining towards, and having sufficiently prepared the ground to be able to do that, then that is what you see as a consequence. So that seems to be the import of that passage. I never really understood that passage before. I was always a bit uncertain what it means, but I think that this is kind of essentially what it means, that ideally you want a light and you want form together, and when they come together, that is when it is truly powerful and has the ability to take you all the way into the jhanas. The jhanas is what's coming up very soon now, next. And then the Buddha goes on. While meditating diligent, keen and resolute, I perceived limited light and saw limited forms. I perceived limitless light and saw limitless forms. And this went on for a whole night, a whole day, and even a whole night and day. I thought, what is the cause? What is the reason for this? And it occurred to me, when my stillness or samadhi or immersion is limited, then my vision is limited. And with a limited vision, I perceive limited light and see limited forms. But when my stillness and samadhi is limitless, then my vision is limitless. And with a limitless vision, I perceive limitless light and see limitless forms. And this goes on for a whole night, a whole day, and even a whole night and day. And so here, what we want to do for the samadhi, we want to fulfill the samadhi. We don't want to have partial samadhi. The samadhi that is limited is not really sufficient. You want to go all the way to the limitless samadhi, the Mahagata Chitta, Anuttara Chitta, unsurpassed mind, the great mind. Mahagata means the great mind. And so this is where you want to be, because that is when the mind is at its most powerful, and that is when it has the ability then to gain the insights that the Buddha-to-be is trying to gain at this point, the awakening itself. So you want to make sure you have sufficient power in that samadhi, and that is what this really is about. So you keep on developing it, until there is no limits anymore. In the sutras, one way they talk about limited samadhi is when you develop a samadhi where it talks about covering the field or the area of 2 or 3 villages. So it's like a perception in your mind. But that is a limited kind of samadhi because it is limited to a certain kind of area. Limitless is when it kind of covers everything. There is no kind of boundaries. It becomes boundless in a sense. That is the limitless samadhi. It doesn't cover a certain area. This is all, of course, in your kind of how you perceive things, but it loses that sense of boundaries, and that's where limitlessness happens. Like the Brahmaviharas, apamana. Apamana means without limit, without boundary. It doesn't mean infinite in the sense of going on forever, because that is in an impossible perception. You can't perceive infinity, but what you can perceive is that there are no boundaries, and that is the kind of the height of samadhi, when there are no boundaries anymore. So then you overcome all of these limits, and that is when you become really ready for the full, final stages of samadhi, the real samadhi. So the Buddha says, after understanding that doubt, loss of focus, dullness and drowsiness, terror, excitement, discomfort, excessive energy, overly lax energy, longing, perception of diversity, and excessive staring on forms are corruptions of the mind, I had given them up. I thought, I have given up my mental corruptions. Now let me develop samadhi in 3 ways. So now comes the 3 ways of developing samadhi, and now it is that we are coming to the jhanas. So these are a different way of talking about the jhanas that we see here compared to what we normally see. And this is a 5-way, 5-stage way of looking at the jhanas. There's a kind of jhana in between the first and the second jhana that occurs in a few places in the sutras, and that is what is coming up next here. So it's a bit unclear exactly if you think about the story of the Buddha. He was striving very hard to find the way to awakening, and then he had to give up all the ascetic practices. He had to give up the teachings under Alara Kalama and Uddhagarbhamaputta, and then he discovered this middle way. So where does all this overcoming of defilements fit in with that sequence? And it is not entirely clear, and possibly it fits in after he discovered that he has to practice in the same way as he did under the rose apple tree as a child, and maybe all of this is kind of getting back to that experience again. And if that is the case, you can see it would have gone on for quite a while. There's a lot of work being done here to find the way through and understanding the mind properly here. But anyway, that's just that may not matter so much, or maybe it does. I'm not sure. I haven't really considered that properly, whether that makes any difference. But I think there is maybe a PhD thesis right there to be written about how all of these things come together, the real life of the Buddha, how every detail kind of sits together. But let's now have a quick look at this idea of the jhanas from the 5-point, the point of view of 5 aspects. So you develop immersion while placing the mind and keeping it connected, without placing the mind but just keeping it connected, without placing the mind or keeping it connected, with rapture, without rapture, with pleasure, with equanimity. So he says 3 ways, and then counting those ways, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ways. So I'm not sure whether something may have been added there in the course of history, because it doesn't look like 3 ways anymore. But never mind. Maybe initially it was just the first 2 jhanas. I don't know what's going on here. But so this is the way, another way of thinking about the jhanas. And so the first one here, developing samadhi or immersion while placing the mind and keeping it connected, is savitaka savichara. This is Bhante Siddhartha's way of translating those 2 words, and I think it's a good translation. It's a little bit wordy, but it's a good translation because it gets to what these things actually are about. And the majority of translations of Vitaka Vichara are not really accurate enough to capture what is going on at this stage in the samadhi. Yeah, now you have entered a different reality. You have left the five senses behind. You are in a place where you've never been before. This is why this is very strange territory that you have now entered. Strange, but incredibly attractive at the same time. And so you have to kind of using the words of ordinary language to describe these states is very tricky because it is a different reality. It's very difficult to relate that reality to our reality before you enter these states. And so for this reason, when the words vitakka, vichara in ordinary vocabulary, it means thinking. Yeah? Vitakka, vitaketi means to think. Vicharati, vichareti means kind of to examine something. You examine an object, and this is kind of like thinking again. But here we are dealing with these things from a different perspective, this perspective of samadhi, so they must have a different meaning here. In the second jhana, vitakka vichara, as we shall see in a second, they come to a complete end. So this is the final kind, or the most subtle kind of thought that is possible to have in human existence. And if it is the most subtle kind of thought that is possible to have, it is not going to be the ordinary thought, what am I going to do tomorrow? Tomorrow I'm going to do this. It's not going to be that kind of thought, obviously not. It's going to be the most subtle, and the most subtle is that movement of the mind, which is at the foundation of thinking. Thinking is a movement of the mind, because it changes, so there is a movement. And this here will then be the very last vestige of movement that exists in samsaric existence. When you come to the second jhana, it's called samadhija. Samadhi, because samadhi is defined as unification of the mind, then the second jhana is the full samadhi. And that's why it's called avitakka avichara. It is fully locked in. There's no movement anymore. Fully locked in. Here, there's a tiny remnant of movement, and that is the idea of vitakka vichara. So placing the mind means like the movement of the mind onto the object. What is the object? It's just piti sukha. It's like piti sukha wobbling slightly, because there isn't really an object. Now there's full unity. You have achieved what people all mystics around the world talk about as non-duality. This is what you have basically achieved at this point. You have gone to non-duality, and this is it's actually called this, and the Sutta is called ekatta. Ekatta means oneness, and that is what you have achieved at this point. And so it's not you are moving towards the object, it's more like the object, your whole experience is just wobbling slightly or moving slightly. That is kind of what this is about. And so you have vitakka, which then is that kind of slight movement, and then you have a slight holding on, which is vichara, the kind of usually called examination. So it's a different ball game altogether. And it's very important to get these things roughly right, because if you don't, you will think when you are in the first jhana, when you're still actually a long way from it. These are really extraordinary states, and that is kind of the whole point of them. Then the Buddha talks about this as the first one, develop immersion or samadhi while placing the mind and keeping it connected. Then you have without placing the mind, just keeping it connected. And it's like now the placing, the movement in a sense is kind of basically gone, and now it is just a keeping it connected, maybe a slight kind of holding on. The mind holds on to the object a little bit. It is not yet fully confident. In the second jhana, you have the idea of confidence, sampasadana. Sampasadana means that you feel completely at ease with what is going on. The mind is fully at ease with it. Here, maybe not 100% at ease. So there's slight holding on. You are not holding on. You're not doing anything. It's like the mind itself is doing this slight grasping, or whatever you might want to call it, a holding of some sort. And that seems to be what is happening here. It's not entirely clear, but something like that seems to be the idea here. And then you come to the last one, which is the second jhana. Now we come to the second one, without placing the mind or keeping it connected. Avitakka, avichara. So this is called samadhija. So the first jhana is called vivekaja piti sukha. And piti sukha is the rapture and the bliss. Vivekaja means born of seclusion. Born of seclusion from what? Well, mainly from the five sense world. You're now secluded or withdrawn or aloof, if you like, from the five sense world. Yeah, that is what you're secluded from. So it's called vivekaja. It's a particular kind of joy and happiness that happens at that point. And you have already been through a number of stages of happiness. We saw that yesterday. You had the pramudra, the piti, the sukha. Yeah, the kind of all of these things. And these things come in various degrees, which is what we saw in the Anapanasati Sutta. And so now we are kind of beyond all of that, even higher stage of piti sukha at this point. So it's this very elevated state of piti sukha, which is very more profound than anything you had before, more blissful, more satisfying, more everything than anything you had before. So everything in a positive sense, that is. And so this is the idea of vivekaja piti sukha as a particular kind of piti sukha born from that seclusion, born from those 5 hindrances. And then when you go to the second jhana, it is called samadhija piti sukha. It's another new kind of piti sukha, born of samadhi this time, when the mind is completely unified. There's no movement at all. It's completely still. Yeah, hour after hour after hour, nothing is happening. Oneness, non-duality, hour after hour. That is like the second jhana. It's called sampasadana because now you are completely confident about what is going on. Just give me one second. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. So so these are some of the. For some reason, I can't remember all the details of the second jhana. So you have vipassana. Vipassana means basically peace, at peace. Yeah. So this is the first time you are fully at peace, and the Buddha calls the jhanas. He calls it the vipassana sukha, the happiness of peace. And so this fully happens at the second jhana. And then you have sampasadana, which I just mentioned before, which is usually called the confidence of the mind, where the mind is completely confident in the object. And so the mind is really fully relaxed into it. And then you have the ekodibhava, which I also mentioned before, cetaso ekodibhava, which is the oneness of the mind. The mind has become one fully at this particular point. Okay, so good enough. So that is the idea of the second jhana. Yeah, so these are the 3 main things here, and then it goes on to talk about the samadhi with rapture. This is the sapitika samadhi. So that means the first jhana, the second jhana, they have with rapture. Then you have the samadhi without rapture, which is the third and the fourth jhana. The samadhi with pleasure, this is sukha, and that's the first, second, and third jhana, and then with equanimity, which is either just the fourth jhana or the third and the fourth jhana. So this is a different way of thinking about it. And so it looks there like the 3 ways are the first jhana, the 1.5 jhana, and the second jhana, and the other things are kind of been added because they're not specific jhanas, they're just grouping the jhanas together in various ways. So then he goes in to all the 4 jhanas according to this, and then he is ready for awakening. That is the end of the Buddhist path. And then, of course, according to the story, at some point he then recalls his past lives, which would be similar to understanding the first noble truth, understanding dukkha. And then he understands it's not actually part of this sutta, but that's kind of the general biography of the Buddha to be. And then he understands the kamma. In other words, he understands the causes, the driving mechanism behind rebirth and how that works. And so seeing all of that is probably so enough that you really, I reject all of this, that it actually allows you then to let go of the sense of self. That is the difficult part, right? That is the vested interest that everyone has so deeply, that to let go, fully penetrate the sense of self and see that it is empty, there's nothing there. That is the really difficult thing, and that is why awakening is so incredibly rare in the world, why Buddhas actually arise so rarely, and why it is so hard to practice this path without a Buddha as a guide. This is why having a guide is so incredibly important in this life. That is the one significant thing. So you have to see so much dukkha that you come to the point where you're willing to give up the sense of self And that, I think, is what is going on here and enables the Buddha to make that breakthrough. And what happens then? Then when I had developed samadhi in these ways, this is kind of interesting how this is summarized here. The knowledge and vision arose in me. My freedom is unshakable. This is my last rebirth. Now there are no more future lives. So it goes straight from the fourth jhana, straight to the knowledge and vision of being an arahant. So, in other words, again, these things are very closely related to each other. You're almost on the verge of arahantship when you come to the fourth jhana. That is the best platform from which to gain that sort of insight. And then you know that your freedom is unshakable. Unshakable means there is no return, there's no going back. You have reached the end station and there's no train going in the opposite direction. You are stuck at that end station, happily stuck at that end station. Please let there be no train to take me back. This is my last rebirth. You know that rebirth is ended. Even if you haven't recalled your past lives, still you know that rebirth has been ended. It is an inferential knowledge. You understand the connection between craving and rebirth as a principle of existence. And because you understand that, because you know craving has come to an end, you know that there's nothing to desire in the world. Everything in the world is completely irrelevant. So how can you have any craving? Then you know there can also be no rebirth as a consequence of that. What you're seeing is like a structure of the mind. The mind works in this way. When there's craving, there's rebirth. When there's no craving, there cannot be any rebirth. Now there are no more future lives. This is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, Venerable Anuruddha and his friends were happy with what the Buddha had said. So, are you happy? Yeah? Good, I'm glad you also are happy, because that helps. Yes?
Someone said that in fact you need only second jhana to gain wisdom. You don't need the fourth jhana.
Yeah.
So could you please clear that why there's some misunderstanding?
It seems that you need maybe even only the first jhana for awakening. Yeah. That's what in many sutras you see, that you develop the awakening and the insight based on the first jhana. So, but of course, the higher it is, the more likely it is to happen. So, if you have the fourth jhana, then it happens almost automatically. With the first jhana, you may have to contemplate more and reflect more. So, the more powerful, the better. The less powerful, the less likely. So stream entry, for example, is because it is a lesser attainment, may well be achieved through the first jhana, for example, whereas arahantship might require a deeper kind of jhana. So that's how it goes. But the path only ends with the fourth jhana. So if you don't become an arahant with the first jhana, then you carry on with the second, the third, the fourth, etc.
So this means that people who have attained jhanas on a regular basis, it's highly likely they are at least partially enlightened.
Very likely, yeah. But let's take the questions later on, dear Ayupa. So I prefer to keep the questions till the evening, and rather than doing it now. So yeah. Okay. So that is the amazing Upakalesa Sutta, and I would have been nice to do the whole sutta, because the first part is also really, really nice. But sometimes you have to make decisions, because Deepika only wanted to have 8 days retreat. No, I'm not blaming Deepika at all. You just have to know that sometimes you just have to make these decisions. And that's really all there's to it. You can never do everything. So. Okay, so let's have a look at this next sutta. Again, looking at it now, I'm not entirely sure why I included this sutta, but there it is anyway. So it is about a few things I already mentioned before. But this is from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, Digha Nikaya 16, and a beautiful sutta. One of my favorites in many ways, because it has so many aspects of the Dhamma in there. But one of the interesting questions about the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, is it really a sutta? Have you considered that before? Is it a sutta? I wonder, that's a good point. Is it a sutta? And the answer is, it is not quite a usual sutta, because usually a sutta is a particular occasion when the Buddha gives a talk. Yeah, that's a sutta usually. It has an introduction, it has an ending, that kind of wraps it up. But Mahaparinibbana Sutta is not like that at all. It is more like a story. And the story is not even told by the Buddha. The story is told by someone else, like a narrator who tells the story. And then there are occasions in the life of the Buddha on his last journey towards his final passing away that are put then, and then it says a few things and there's more story. It says a few things, more story. It's more like a biography than actually it is a sutta in the ordinary sense. And so, for this reason, it is, which had to be, when you see things like that, you start to wonder what is going on. And one of the interesting things about the Mahaparinibbana Sutta is that it connects with the story of the Buddha as it is found in the Vinaya Pitaka. In the Vinaya Pitaka, you find the story of the life of the Buddha from the moment of his awakening until the establishment of the Sangha. That story is told in the beginning of what is called the Kandakas in the Vinaya Pitaka. And so this story here kind of matches with that. It's a similar kind of story. And originally, these probably belong together in one long story. In fact, in some of the other schools of Buddhism, that is exactly what we see. We see one long story holding everything together in this way. So it's a bit different from the other suttas. And for that reason, when you read the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, you should treat it a little bit differently. You should understand that it is a narrative. And narratives that have not been told by the Buddha, told by someone else, well, sometimes they are not as certain as the content of the Dhamma itself. So that is useful to know. Anyway, so now here we have the Buddha, and he is on his last walk. He's walking from Rajagaha, which is the capital of Magadha, the most powerful kingdom in India at that time. Later on became the Ashokan Empire. And he's walking from there, and he has finally, after a long series of events, he arrives in Vesali. And while he's staying in Vesali during the rains retreat, he gets ill, he gets sick. And this here is what happens soon afterwards. This is where this starts. So soon after the Buddha had recovered from that sickness, he came out from his dwelling and sat down in the shade of the porch on the seat spread out. Then Venerable Ananda went up to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and said to him, "Sir, it's fantastic that the Buddha is comfortable and well, because when the Buddha was sick, my body felt like it was drugged. I was disoriented, and the teachings weren't clear to me. Still, at least I was consoled by the thought that the Buddha wouldn't get fully extinguished without bringing something up regarding the Sangha of mendicants." So Venerable Ananda is expecting the Buddha to say something about, maybe the transmission or the future or what happens after I die. This is like Bodhinyana Monastery. What is going to happen after Ajahn Brahm dies? But except that this is like 100 times or 1,000 times kind of more significant. And you can see that there is a concern there. The Buddha is going to die. The Buddha is the one who has given you all the teachings. The Buddha is the one who has told you everything that you ever need to know. Whenever there is the tiniest problem in the Sangha, they will go to the Buddha. And I have always had this almost feeling a bit sorry for the Buddha, seeing the kind of issues that they bring up with the Buddha. The things, how often should we shave our head, and how long should our nails be, and that kind of stuff, and all the tiny little things. If you read the Vinaya Pitaka, there's literally thousands of tiny little rules in there that the Buddha, many of them laid down by the Buddha, many of them probably came later on. And so this is why the parinibbana is kind of, is a kind of positive thing for some of these arahants. Oh, finally get out of here. This is all this, all of these things. It's just too much. You can see why that is the case, and why people like Ajahn Brahm say that it is Kushinara Where the Buddha died, that is the best of the holy places, yeah, because the Buddha died. Wow, that is the final release from everything. This is where the workman finally collects his wages, or the workwoman, I suppose, collects her wages. So you can see Venerable Ananda, who is already a stream enterer, because he obviously has some attachment to the Buddha. This is hardly surprising. Being with the greatest spiritual genius in human history, it's kind of natural that you might build up some attachment to that. And so when the Buddha is sick and he can see impermanence, yeah, suddenly impermanence manifests before you. The Buddha gets sick. Yeah, this is impermanence manifesting. Yeah, we should not wait, of course, till this point. We should not wait till we actually are faced with it so starkly. We should develop the perception of impermanence all the time to remind us that this is the nature of things. Everyone must die. There's no holding on to things of the world. If you wait till it actually happens, and then you end up like Venerable Ananda. Actually, you probably end up far worse than Venerable Ananda. He is probably in a fairly good place to be able to deal with this. But the majority of people have far greater suffering than this. So this is the power of developing the perception of impermanence, and death in particular, is that you tend to be prepared for these the reality when the reality hits. And so even Venerable Ananda is not quite prepared. And so that is why he says, my body felt like it was drugged. I was disoriented. The teachings weren't clear to me. You can't really remember the Dhamma anymore. Your mind is all over the place. You are confused. You can't deal with it. And that's the last thing you want to, when you need the Dhamma, then you can't remember. It's kind of problematic. And so this is what happens if we are not ready. And then he says this idea, I consoled myself that the Buddha would at least say something to the Sangha. So what does the Buddha say about that? And he says the following, but what could the mendicant Sangha expect from me, Ananda? I have taught the Dhamma without making any distinction between secret and public teachings. The realized one doesn't have a closed fist of a tutor when it comes to the teachings. If there's anyone who thinks, I shall lead the mendicant Sangha, or the Sangha of mendicant is meant for me, let them bring something up regarding the Sangha. But the realized one, the Buddha, doesn't think like this. So why should he bring up something regarding the Sangha? And so this is one of those famous teachings that you only find really here in this Parinibbana Sutta. So the first thing he says here is that there is no distinction between secret and public teachings. Everything is out there. Everything is available to everyone. The idea of having a secret teaching is something you use if you want to have a cult. Yeah, when you have a cult, it's like, these are my inner core of disciples, they get these special teachings, yeah? Don't tell anyone outside, because this is special for you, yeah? You are special to me, and so we kind of have this core. And those outside, they all want to get into the inner circle to get the special teachings. And there's fighting and infighting and disharmony and all kind of problems. This is one of the signs of a cult, that there are special teachings for some people and non-special teachings for others. But of course, the Buddha, there is no cult. There is only, these teachings are only for the benefit and compassion for the world. And so everything is out in the open. So what does that mean? That doesn't necessarily mean that you teach everything the same thing. Because even though it is kind of out there, it is available, there is also the case that there is time and place for teaching the teachings. You don't start with a newcomer and tell him about the ending of everything, because he will just walk out the door and never come back. Yeah? He will say, this is just too much. And so you have to be careful also with how you present these teachings. Present them in a way that it gradually leads people on, so they're able to benefit properly from them. So there's no secrecy as such, but there's also a knowledge and understanding of teaching in an appropriate way. Yeah, and this is the other thing I was mentioning the other day about too much emphasis on dukkha sometimes when we teach the Dhamma, not enough on the happiness, which is what people can understand and relate to. So it is about making them relatable and making teachings that people actually can benefit from. And then they might get eventually the full benefit of these teachings. the realized one doesn't have a closed fist of a tutor when it comes to the teachings. Everything has been revealed. It's not like you're holding anything back to the last moment or anything like that. If there's anyone who thinks, I shall lead the mendicant Sangha, or the Sangha of mendicant is meant for me, then let them bring something up. Yeah, the Buddha is basically saying that that is not the appropriate way of thinking, because then he says the realized one doesn't think like this. So why should he, the Buddha, bring up something regarding the Sangha? The Buddha doesn't think that he leads the Sangha. Isn't that interesting? Kind of really interesting. And of course, that is the idea that there's no sense of self there. There's no sense of self-importance. I lead anyone. I teach what I know from my insight for the benefit of others. But I don't really consider myself as a leader or anything like that. If other people take it up, they take it up. If they don't take it up, well, that's up to them. Yeah, and I just make things available. A leader is more maybe someone who kind of controls and manipulates a bit and all these kind of things and kind of makes sure that the Sangha becomes as large as possible. But there is no kind of vested interest here. There's no kind of broader kind of agenda or anything. It is just giving the teachings for the benefit of everyone in the world. When there's no sense of self, then also there's no sense that you are a leader. I think this is how it kind of goes together. Yeah. And then the Buddha says, I'm now old, elderly, and senior. I'm advanced in years and have reached the final stage of life. I'm currently 80 years old. Just as a decrepit old cart is kept going by a rope, in the same way the Buddha's body is kept going as if by a rope. Sometimes the realized one, not focusing on any signs, and with the cessation of certain feelings, enters and remains in the signless stillness of the heart, the signless samadhi of the heart. Only then does the realized one's body become more comfortable. So he enters one of these powerful samadhis. Not sure why he talks about the signless meditation there, why he doesn't talk about the jhanas, for example, exactly why that is the case. I don't know. Maybe he just wants to say something about the signless meditation, signless samadhi. He wants to bring that forth for some reason. And maybe that's why that is mentioned at this particular point. But anyway, only when you enter samadhi, when you leave the body behind, only then is the body comfortable. Only then, because then the body disappears, and so then it kind of goes, and then you're okay. So the Buddha is old, yeah. And again, another of these signs that the Buddha is very human, just like everyone else. He has a physical body. Physical bodies can only endure so long. And after a while, they are like an old, decrepit cart, held together by a rope. Yeah, it's kind of the body is really falling apart. It really sounds like the Buddha is coming to the very end of his life here, the way he's talking about this. And I've always found it interesting that the Buddha talks about himself in this way. It is not just here. There are some suttas also in the Samyutta Nikaya where the Buddha talks about his skin no longer being as beautiful and golden colored as it used to be. It is wrinkled. He's stooped. His kind of his body is kind of stooped. He's no longer straight. Yeah, all of these things. It sounds like a kind of any old person, really. Why does the Buddha talk about himself in this way? And I think it is precisely for this reason to remind people that he is also human like everyone else. It is that reminder that we should not kind of put the Buddha on the wrong kind of pedestal. Yes, we should put the Buddha on a pedestal, but not the wrong pedestal. The right pedestal, the pedestal of human being perfected, not the pedestal of someone completely different from everyone else, like a god or a universal principle or whatever. And I think this is what the Buddha is saying here. Maybe he knows that later generations will think about the Buddha in the wrong way and is reminding us that he basically is going through the same things as everyone else. Maybe that is what he's doing here. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, but there must be some reason why he's saying these things. And obviously also reminding everyone of impermanence. Of the Buddha's impeding passing away, death, if you like. And because of this, then he carries on and he says, so Ananda, live as your own island, your own refuge, with no other refuge. Let the teaching be your island and your refuge, with no other refuge. Yeah, you are your own. In other words, be independent. That's what he's saying here. Be your own refuge. Let the teaching be the refuge, the Dhamma. And of course, this is why it is so important that we try to keep the Dhamma of the Buddha, because that is the real refuge. The Dhamma of some other person may be nice, but maybe not. The real refuge at the end of the day is the Dhamma of the Buddha. So you are your own refuge in the sense that you are independent, and then you lean on the Dhamma to be able to be your own refuge. So being your own refuge is almost like equivalent of taking the Dhamma as your refuge. The Buddha is passing away, so now the Dhamma is your refuge. And how do you do that? Well, the way to do that is to practice meditation, because within yourself, inside your own mind, where you are free from the world outside, well, that is where you do indeed find refuge. There you find the happiness, you find the independence from the five senses. The jhanas are precisely that. And as you're practicing anapanasati, well, actually, you're already leaning towards that liberation from the five senses. The five senses are gradually fading away. Yeah, like we saw the other day in the Anapanasati Sutta, they're fading away until they disappear completely. And so your refuge is within. And lo and behold, that is a very beautiful refuge, a very delightful, attractive, wonderful refuge that everyone can find within themselves. A place where you really feel at home for the first time. Well, this is it. This is my real home. This is where I should be. This is much more real than everything else. This is what, this is what I've been looking for all this time. And so that is why you become your own refuge, because you have access to those things. And that is why the Buddha then says, and how does a mendicant do this, to have a refuge for themselves? It is when a mendicant meditates by observing an aspect of the body, keen, aware, and mindful, rid of covetousness and displeasure for the world. Yeah, so this is the standard formula for the Satipatthana. So you're observing an aspect of the body. So this is the kayanupassi. And so I think this translation is correct. Yeah, observing an aspect of the body. So the various aspects would be the 31 parts, the 4 elements, the breath, etc. Keen, aware, and mindful. So we have seen the word keen before, atapi. Aware is sampajano, mindful is sattima. So you have a sampajana, in other words, you know what you are doing, you know the purpose, yeah, you know that the purpose is kept in mind, so you're doing the right thing, the suitability, and this kind of, especially those two, are the most important aspect of sampajana, I think. And the other aspects, like non-delusion and gochara, are higher aspects of this. But starting off with those two, yeah, rid of covetousness and displeasure for the world. So rid of desire and displeasure for the world. Rid of desire and aversion for the world. Yeah, these are different ways of translating this. He has covetousness because that's how it translates abhijja. But in this context, it stands in for the first hindrance, sensual desire. So you're rid of that desire for the world. The world here being the world of the 5 senses. The word world in the Dhamma, in Pali, loka, is basically the same as used in the same way as world in English. It means different things depending on context. The whole world says it means humanity. The world out there can mean the whole universe. It can mean different things. It can mean the planet Earth or whatever. Same thing in Pali. So because you are rid of that desire and aversion for the world, you are free from it. And that is why you find a refuge in meditation in this way. You're practicing anapanasati or some other aspect of the satipatthanas here. So, and then they meditate observing an aspect of feelings. an aspect of the mind, an aspect of principles, Dhamma, keen, aware and mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world of the five senses. That is how a mendicant is their own island, their own refuge, with no other refuge. That is how the teaching is their island and the refuge, with no other refuge. So there you are. So Dhamma as a refuge here, means the practice. It's kind of interesting. We often think about the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. We think of Dhamma very often as the teaching. And of course, the teachings are the refuge, because that is where you go to seek for advice. That is where you go to understand the spiritual path. But the Dhamma here means the result of that teaching, which is the practice. And of course, you find the refuge within that practice as well. In fact, very often in the suttas, you see the Buddha talking about the Buddha Gādava, the Gādava for the Buddha, respect for the Buddha, leads to respect for the Dhamma, leads to respect for the Sangha, leads to respect for the training. The training is the practical application of the Dhamma, and that respect for the training leads to respect for Samadhi. Because Samadhi is like the culmination of the training. It brings all the other aspects of the training together. And so these things are kind of different sides of the same coin. Whether now or after I have passed away, anyone who shall live as their own island, their own refuge, with no other refuge, with the teaching as the island and the refuge, with no other refuge, those mendicants of mine who want to train shall be among the best of the best. So this is how you become the best of the best. You become the arahants or whatever by living as your own island and your own refuge. This is how you reach the pinnacle of the spiritual practice, taking you eventually all the way to arahantship itself. So there you are. That is all for now. We'll see you.